Contrary, no. Carried. Now, with a little bit of luck, we might just get through the agenda before lunch and complete, if that's the wish of councillors. We then come to item, with a bit of luck, item 13, the governing body meeting schedule for January 2020 to the election 2022. And if I can ask Marguerite, just she's already there and prepared, and just to make two comments here before inviting Marguerite to speak to it. One, when you vote for a recess, what recess means is that there are no meetings scheduled in a recess period. That does not mean that everybody's on holiday. That's not my instruction. That's simply our interpretation of what a recess is. And I know from looking around the table that members appreciate the opportunity free of meeting schedules. I certainly do it during the Christmas recess to actually get out and involve yourself in the community rather than being tied up for long hours in committee meetings. That's the first point. The second point is all of the options for the meeting schedule involve the same number of weeks for recess, but talking to members, probably there is no consensus around when that recess should be taken, but the two most popular options appeared to be option 3, which would create a week recess in October during the Labour weekend week at the expense of 1 week recess in late January. And option 4 would maintain the long recess in December to late January, but not have a recess period between July and the end of the year. So my assumption is that if there is no consensus around that, those two options ought to be simply put to a vote, but that will happen after discussion and after an explanation from Marguerite. So Marguerite, if you'd like to talk to the balance of the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So some of you at a previous meeting made comments about trying to make the schedule work better for you. And as you know, I did send you an email asking you for some of your preferences. I'm very conscious in putting the final schedule in front of you that we probably did not satisfy all the requirements of all of you. Well, I'm quite sure that we didn't, and we try to find a compromise that seemed to reflect the majority of the comments that you sent. So what we're proposing is to start the meetings half an hour later at 10 a.m. and there were comments about the meetings having to finish at a certain time to give you some certainty for your commitments after the meetings. And so putting a time limit to 5 p.m., which obviously will be at the discretion of the chair of the meetings in the end, but maybe giving a little bit more structure to those days. And the second thing that we tried and do was to have a 2-week recess in July, which some of you did prefer. And there was no absolute majority, but there was a relative majority of councillors who wanted this recess to be during the school holidays, which is what we've proposed to do. Some councillors asked for the Tuesday after Easter Monday to be kept free, and so we did this, incorporated that, and actually managed to put a recess for the rest of that week for those last 3 days, which means that it gives you a little bit more flexibility around Easter. And then, as the mayor said, there was the option of recess in October or and starting 1 week earlier in January, or no recess in October and keeping that 6-week period. And if you wanted to change this and go for a recess in October and start a day earlier at the end of January as opposed to the beginning of February, we would amend the schedule accordingly by sort of sliding the way the meetings have been scheduled. We have sort of stuck to the principle of having other committees on Tuesdays, the workshops on Wednesdays and the big committee meetings on Thursdays, no meetings on Fridays. And unfortunately, there will be some meetings that will have to be on some Mondays. We're keeping these to a minimum, and we've tried to put more than a meeting on Monday so that when you come in, you're coming in for a full schedule of meetings as opposed to one meeting. So hopefully this will work, give you a little bit of structure in the way it works.
Thank you very much. Just the first question from me, if I may. The committee meetings going between 10 and 5 p.m, it's still at the discretion of the chair with the support of the committee to extend beyond 5 p.m. to complete business. Yep. Okay, that's good. Any other questions? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of clarification. So the meeting schedule that you have in the agenda, is that based on
Option 4.
option 4?
Oh, sorry, option
Yes, option 4.
4.
Option 4.
No, option 4. Just a discussion between the secretary and myself here. I'm sure I'm right and she's wrong. It is. I'll just clarify that, however, before I make such a bold claim. It is based on option 4, as I read your paper.
Hold on, I'm being told it's option.
I'm reading para 22. Staff consider that option 4 is the best fit and one that can most easily accommodate. I take it from that
Yes,
that you have put
but
option. Okay.
But October doesn't read like that.
Sorry, can I get clarification from Marguerite?
So I'm looking at Sandra because we did this together, and she's just signaling to me that she's actually done it on option 3.
Okay.
So that recess in October is
ignore para 22.
Hence my question, Your
Option 3, right. Thank you, Councillor Simpson, for clearing that matter up. Further questions? Comments? Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, just in terms of the CCO. Oh, sorry.
No,
Is
keep
someone
going.
else
I've got
before me? In terms of the CCO liaison role, I noticed, I'm looking at the annual calendar, that there's a few that's my regulatory committee is on the same day. And I indicated that I cannot do the last Monday of the month, Mondays in the afternoon, and that's when the water care meeting is. So that's a big, it's unfortunate.
Okay.
I did indicate that.
So.
So yes, through the chair, unfortunately, our ability to control the meetings of the CCOs is.
Mr. Chair, it's not that I know we can't, but if you indicate you're not available, then and you get appointed to a board when you're not available, that's sort of been my whole conversation around it at the beginning. That we've got to, it just means we'll hardly be able to attend, and then you've appointed me, and now calendar makes it moot.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that conflict, and but I'm happy to have a discussion between yourself and officials and myself offline, Councillor Cooper. Your first requirement will, of course, be regulatory, but if that is too interruptive of your other role as liaison councillor on water care, then that's probably what we'd need to look at. Okay, or we can move regulatory. We could move regulatory is probably the...
All the time, but it's the other commitment that I have that I've been telling staff for 6 years.
Let's try to deal with that offline and try to find a solution that works for you. Okay, Councillor Coombe, I've got you down as a question.
In practice, Marguerite, on so option 3 and option 4, and I mean I have heaps of flexibility, so how I organise my life, so I'm not really wedded to anything, but I just want to clarify because it's not really clear when it says December to late January under both options, and in practice, is that meaning after anniversary weekend, or is in the option 3 meaning would come back for the week before anniversary weekend?
That is correct. And if we reduce that recess over summer by 1 week, You
Yeah.
would you would come back before anniversary weekend.
Would be for the week before, not on on the Christmas side. It wouldn't
No,
be going for it would be,
Be coming back earlier.
so for next year, it's going to be, come the week starting the 20th of January, then anniversary day is the 27th.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that interpretation is correct. Though I'm hesitate to say so, particularly if Councillor Simpson has a different view.
That's why I asked my question about what option this was.
Yeah.
Because if this is option 3, all right,
Yep.
it's option 3. Period. Don't change it. If we go for option 3, it's option 3. Now, if you've read what's happening when, fine. I have. And I just want to know if that's the vote, this is not going to change.
What I've got in front of me and been directed by the Secretary is that we come back on the 28th, which is the day after anniversary day.
Which would be option 3.
That's option 3, as I understand it.
Option 4 would have you starting there. So this
Option 4 has us starting back on the 4th of February.
So this is option 4, not option 3.
If this printed, sorry, Your Worship, I just want to make this
Yeah.
really clear. If this schedule printed in the agenda is option 3, there's only CCO meetings at the end of January. That's fine. If that's option 3 and it's all
I
worked
just
out to fit, that's fine.
I didn't
And
put the
that's why I
schedule
asked the
together,
question.
so I'm asking for advice from officers. What you have printed out is option 3. That's what I've been instructed. I thought it was option 4, but you two are still making your mind up on that. Makes it rather difficult for the rest of us.
So in the schedule that you've got in front of you, the summer recess goes until after Auckland anniversary. There are CCO board meetings in that
Yeah.
week. The difference between the schedule and option 3, as in the report, is that the recess week in October is not around Labour Day, it's earlier in October. So there's a slight sort of scheduling conflict between the paper and the schedule there, but it is still option 3.
Okay. It's as clear as mud to me. I hope it's as clearer to the rest of you. Okay. Are there further questions to that? I also I have an amendment that's been tabled, so maybe we'll put this on the table now, Councillor Watson, and that is to add an E, which reads that where appropriate, workshops be open to the public. So maybe I'll ask you to speak to that amendment, and it's been seconded, I think, by Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll be quick on this one. You'll see that a reasonable part of this paper is devoted to the issue of open workshops, and we did discuss it briefly back on the 12th of November. And I just really wanted to focus people's attention in on point 34 there, which talks about the one advantage of opening workshops is that it reflects the Council's commitment to open and transparent decision making. I don't think anyone's expecting hordes of people to be banging at the door to get in there, but I think it's an important principle that we are open. One of the criticisms of CCOs is that they are not open, that they're secretive and they're closeted. I think it's a little hard for us to sustain some of our criticisms if we have meetings that are closed off too. Obviously, there are times where the workshops it's inappropriate, there's legal advice being given, or there's information being handed out that can't be put out into the public realm. No one's talking about that. But I think the other justifications for not proceeding with that are a little tenuous. I think a workshop is different than a meeting. It's not a debate. Personally, when I go to workshops, I'm there to receive information and then go away and think about it. So I think the actual forum is different, and the expectation that somehow staff might be curtailed on what they might say, or elected members might see it as an opportunity to debate or whatever, I think no, that's a little bit of a stretch, really. I think very quickly you could have a situation where the few people that do want to come along, or the press, from a point of view of disseminating information. We're all talking about communicating with Aucklanders. If you're cutting Aucklanders off from getting information that's leading into a discussion of basis, then you're not really contributing to that civic engagement, and it's it's another thing that doesn't help the 35% voter turnout or whatever it is. So I think if we're talking about a package of being seen to be transparent, of doing the right thing, this is a relatively small concession that can be made that won't be taken up by a lot of people, but at least we're walking the talk. To close off and to hang on to the old, the old chestnuts of, restricting debate and people feeling unsafe and that, no, that's really pushing it out there. So simple amendment there, Mr. Mayor, that the chairs could decide on. Some chairs, if they felt uncomfortable, well, they clearly wouldn't be part of that, but I'm sure there are others around that would welcome that. They would welcome discussions or people being educated about the issues of the day, and that would be us again doing, as we said in point 34, of walking the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments on that amendment? We haven't yet moved this amendment, so maybe I'll move it formally first, seconded by Councillor Coombe. Oh, sorry. No, not the amendment. Not the. I'm talking about the recommendations as a whole. What I intend to do, I'm sorry, is to take each recommendation separately, because some, like A, may be fully supported, B will need to be put to a vote, and E, we've yet to have the debate on it. But I just want to put the recommendations on the table and the amendments still to come. So these are the original recommendations. I'll move. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Collins, and then we have an amendment in the name of Councillor Watson, and so what we are now doing is actually discussing that amendment.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Henderson. Yes.
I just want to draw your attention to 1.57. Every proposed amendment must be relevant to the motion under discussion, and I'd just like a opinion on how relevant this is, given that this report is about timing. It is not about actual openness or otherwise to the public.
Okay, it's a fair point of order. Can I ask for an opinion from Marguerite on that?
The report does talk about the workshops and whether they could be open or not. So it is contained in the report from paragraphs 28 to 36.
So the amendment is in order, and we're now having discussion on the amendment. Councillor Walker, I've recognised, and Councillor
So I want to support the amendment by Councillor Watson. I'm a frequent attender of workshops, have been for some time, and often when I'm at a workshop, I ask the question of the officers, can this information be made public? Because it is relevant to the people of Auckland. And often I would suggest the information that we are being presented would be relevant and people would like to see it. And I make the observation that also often the information that we have in the workshop may not be information that is necessarily tabled as part of a council meeting. There are often PowerPoints, for example, and that is a common mode of communication, and I often find those PowerPoints very informative. Sometimes I make suggestions that they could be enhanced. So I think the motion here around where appropriate workshops be open to the public is relevant because it refers not just to the workshop itself but also the information in the workshop, and it may well be that the chair of the workshop or the particular committee, because most of these workshops generally come under a particular committee, may allow the chair of that workshop to make an appropriate call. And I certainly agree with Councillor Watson that we should be more transparent than is otherwise the case. For example, I can think of a recent workshop that we had around the CRLL, the City Rail link, where we were presented with information that I know people would have like to have had earlier rather than later around the ramifications of that project in terms of things that were happening and not happening and the like. And I could give many other examples where workshops also communicated useful information that the people of Auckland would have liked to have seen. So why wouldn't you?
Thank you very much. Councillor Philip Piner. Sorry, he was there a moment ago. He's back.
Sorry, Bishop. Look, I was just going to come and see you because just in regards to the amendment and speaking only to that, but I also recall that our first governing body meeting when this particular issue was raised, you were thinking that where appropriate, that workshops be open to the public. Mm-hmm. So the reason I mention that, Your Worship, is that you still have the ability, if you wish, to add that instead of having a debate on the amendment. So that's why I was going to come over, and if you wanted to add to it, is to be included in regards to the substantive, we could still do it. But look, I'm leaving it open to you as the chair, Your Worship, because I recall the words you said at that particular meeting, and where appropriate, that we have. So that was the question, Your Worship, was do we need to go through the debate, or is up to your and Chair's prerogative to include it into the substantive?
Yeah, I'm happy with it, just with the permission of the mover and seconder. The trouble is with where appropriate leaves it a bit wide open. I think Councillor Watson, you talked about probably the discretion of the chair. Are you happy if I make it at the discretion of the chair? Workshops will be open to the public. So, so with sorry. Chair, I think we'll leave it. We'll leave it at chair. I think it's simpler. So if we can make that amendment, I'm happy with the agreement of the seconder of the item. If he's happy, we'll simply accept that as a recommendation. Okay.
Sorry, Scott, can I just clarification? Are you saying it's a recommendation, or is it still an amendment, or you just putting it into recommendations?
I'm happy with the change that's been agreed by the mover and seconder to accept it as the mover of this item and agreed to by the seconder to accept that as part of the recommendation.
So my concern about that, Mr. Chair, is that the word appropriate is so discretionary. Yeah. And
no. Sorry, the changes where.
Yes, I'm just saying. That's right.
The change isn't reflected yet on the movement. The thing there. It should be at the discretion of the chair. The workshop agree that workshop can be open to the public. It's where appropriate will then be a decision that is made by the chair, looking at the content of the material, and there'll be many workshops that won't have anything that do not allow that workshop to be open to the public. There'll be some where it's a proposal and it would be inappropriate to put the proposal up until it was properly formulated. But the chair would make that decision, and I'm confident that the chairs will be able to accept that.
Not, but anyway.
Okay, I mean, it's open. It's open for further discussion and debate. It can be, and if people want to take that separately, they can.
Mr. Chair, what I'm objecting to you is to just unilaterally go, I'm just going to put it in recommendations as if those words have made it acceptable, and part of that, it was put up as an amendment, and now you've changed that opportunity to debate it. That was my concern.
No. It can still absolutely, councillor, can still be debated, and people, if they choose, can ask for a vote to be taken separately on E if they're not comfortable with that position. Yeah, no, that's fine, and I'm happy to accept that request, and also happy for people to speak to it. I'm simply expressing my view, and it's up to the governing body as to what they wish to do on that particular recommendation. So we now have Councillor Dalton.
Well, my concern was about appropriate and what that was, but now a discretion of the chair. I guess I would want to know from the chairs how they feel about workshops, because I'm not sure that Councillor Watson is necessarily going to achieve his outcome until we know how chairs feel themselves about having open workshops.
If I can just speak to that again briefly, it's not a blanket that all workshops will be open, but at the discretion of the chair, where there is material that is obviously totally appropriate to have in the public arena, it can be open. And as Councillor Filipaina pointed out at a discussion the other day on this very matter, I indicated that I was open to that, and I'm being consistent with the position that I took the other day on it. And the chair is the person most knowledgeable about what's going to happen on the agenda, because the chair has read through the agenda and knows that, okay, maybe that aspect of it is not appropriate, and therefore the workshop will be confidential. And the chair obviously has the ability to have a discussion on that point at the start of the meeting with the members of the committee, or members of the committee can raise it with the chair. So that decision will be at the discretion of the chair, but the chair can take cognizance of what the views of committee members are and the nature of what's on the agenda. Does that help? Sort of. Okay. Councillor Collins. Fine. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I know this is something that Councillors Watson and Walker do feel very strongly about, and on the surface it can look like a very democratic thing to make workshops open. What I would like to offer is the counterfactual to that, and having come from the experience of where workshops work very effectively, where you have the opportunity for debate and free and frank advice, which is so essential to our democratic decision making. I think what has perhaps not been working well around the governing body table is perhaps how workshops have actually been very effective for that free and frank advice. And I think all councillors understand the importance of that. But what I wanted just to offer in terms of a different perspective is that what I have noticed coming as a councillor is that people are very happy to give me briefings offline, and briefings that I would have thought would be in workshops, and where I would want to be sitting around with all my colleagues and being able to ask questions freely. And what Councillors Watson and Walker are basically saying to me is that I will not be in a workshop and able to ask real questions that might be random, they might be pie in the sky, they might be things that I just want to put out there, have some really solid discussion, and then we might move on. If workshops are made public, and there will be put a lot of pressure on chairs to be seen to be doing the right thing. If this, I'm with Councillor Cooper and not very happy with how this has been massaged to make it a little bit more acceptable, when I think this is still undermining the principle of free and frank advice. So what I am saying is that I think there's already a push to minimise workshops, to make them shorter, and that by doing this, you're basically saying, Councillors Watson and Walker, that you want councillors just to be asking for more offline advice, for more briefings that are not done with all our colleagues in the room. And I know that that is what happens on local boards where you make workshops open. Everything just gets pushed offline, and you just start picking up the phone to talk to people to try and get the free and frank advice that you can't get around this room. And I also offer the comment too that something was said about being in a safe environment, and I'm afraid there are councillors around this room who have been in very unsafe environments in public forum that might not have been experienced by some councillors. And in that unsafe environment, you cannot ask free and frank advice and debate and talk to your colleagues in a free way when there might be one or two antagonistic people in the room who are there to troll you, who are there to try and call you out, and who are there to try and catch you off guard when you might just want to be putting out an idea that might not go anywhere, but you want to be able to discuss it with your colleagues. So I would really like us to go back to what was the original amendment, because that is the true core of what you were asking, was for all workshops to be in public, and not this kind of halfway that it could be on the discretion of the chair, because I think they'll be put under pressure to do it in terms of the politics of it and not what is best for our democratic decision making, which is to have some time for good, solid questions and free and frank advice. And that's what I would ask. And I say all that on the proviso that I totally understand that information should be made publicly available, and it should be made publicly available as soon as practicable. But often that is not the case when we are in a workshop session, because that information might be quickly out of date and quickly move on. So that is my plea to my colleagues, that we do have that opportunity for our workshops for that time for confidential, not necessarily for workshops that are not in the gaze of the public, so that we can exercise our democratic decision making effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, it's still up as an amendment at the moment, though it's been accepted by the Chair and the Deputy Chair, but either way it will be subject to a vote, and the vote will say either we maintain the blanket rule that the workshops are not open to the public, or we have the discretion of the Chair to open it to the public where appropriate. Well, it doesn't say where appropriate, but that would be at the discretion and on the judgment of the Chair. So that will be, if this matter is voted on separately, which I take it members would like to do, that's the choice that you have between those two options. Councillor Newman.
Are we in debate now? We're still on questions.
Yeah. This we are debating.
Okay. Well, I mean, it appears that we're heading. The amendment, does it?
Well, no. The amendment is now part of the substantive amendment, but if it's convenient to members, we can simply leave it as an amendment and have a vote on it. The result will be the same either way. You will make the decision whether you want a blanket rule for not being open to the public in workshops for all of the reasons and the valid reasons that Councillor Coombe has put forward, or that the Chair has a discretion to open it where those factors might not apply. Okay, so maybe with the agreement again of my seconder, we'll keep it as an amendment. We'll focus the debate on this amendment at this point. I think that's simpler. Okay, Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you. It's quite interesting. I listened carefully to the last speaker, but respectfully I disagree, Councillor Coombe, because the principle of free and frank doesn't exist in the Lagoima, but the principle of availability does. So you start from the basis of the availability of information which is held, and if you were to apply that in the context of a workshop, then yeah, you do have to move to the presumption that we have to be available, accessible, that the information that is transmitted there will be information that can be subject to disclosure, and therefore you would consider, well actually, you would have to consider this as a discussion that will be potentially held in the public realm, in the public domain. It'll be open to everyone if they wish to race in from the street at 135 Albert Street and race up to level 26 and sit around there and take notes. But if the information that is to be covered needs to be withheld, well, of course, there is the opportunity to have items within the agenda of a workshop confidential, and that applies in relation to Section 7 of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. And I would assume that would be addressed with professional advice to the Chair from the officers prior to the meeting, to the workshop taking place. Your Worship, I don't think it's actually the discretion of the Chair of the relevant workshop. It is the application of the Act, the Lagoima, that determines whether the information to be covered will be covered confidentially or as part of an open workshop agenda. So I think if those things can be covered in the preparation of a workshop, then it should be that the amendment which is being proposed here can be accommodated, but it will have to be accommodated on the basis that there are some things that will have to be considered confidentially because there is a reason to do so, and that the reasons for withholding, for keeping those matters in confidential will be stated so that the public know why. Have I interpreted that correctly, the mover and seconder? Okay. That will be
Councillor Hills.
A few questions. What is the cost of opening up workshops? Because I assume that means filming them, which we pay.
No.
So it's not filming?
Well, we don't on smaller committees, right?
On the other than the major committees, meetings of the smaller committees can be open to the public, but not necessarily live streamed.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just speak then. I wonder if the committees as a whole, the expectation is that they will be filmed. I don't know. There's a additional cost there. I think this puts a lot of power in one person. For each committee to have the decision-making, the chair of each committee to have the decision-making power to open or close workshops, to give everyone around the table either open or closed workshops, conversations. Right now, I don't actually see anyone, as far as I know, there's not many, if any, public in this room right now. If we're wanting to engage people in a meaningful way through very good information, good debate, interesting topics and engagement, then I would say opening them to our conversations where we're understanding and putting out ideas and all that is probably not the best way to do it, considering we don't get many public come to our committee meetings as they are. The other thing is that if the discretion of the chair decides, like Councillor Coob says, that a committee or a subject or a topic is completely on the record for everyone to ask, maybe a question that they're embarrassed about or they don't understand or that sort of thing, then it will move into private conversations over coffee, on the telephone, finding out information instead of asking them around the table. There's going to be some massive issues we have to deal with as a council, and if we can't hear and see our honest opinions that may or may not be palatable or, you know, in the first instance when we first hear things, then that's going to be a problem. There has been issues on the 2 local boards in our area of the North Shore having open workshops last term where they would get annoyed at Councillor Darby and I getting information first. Why were we getting information first? Because they were in draft form, because there might be this project is 50,000 to 100,000, we're not sure yet. So they would not bring anything to the local boards without a finite position because they did not want it to get into the media when that early kind of discussion, early kind of formulating ideas. We're elected to do that. We're elected to bring our community's views and into those discussions. They're not secret. It's so we can have a good open conversation about understanding an issue by hearing this could be 1 million, this could be 2 million. You know, once it's out there, it has to be correct. It has to be correct information. Otherwise, then it's budget blowouts or cuts or whatever else. And if we leave that up to one person per committee to make that decision, I don't think that is democratic at all. I mean, last term, we had the discussion and from certain members of the council who did not want our workshop records public. We had our workshop attendance on the internet, like our council committees, and certain members got that removed because they did not want their attendance or lack of attendance to be shown. And now suddenly we're going to open everything up. I think it sounds nice. We put all the details are in our committee papers anyway of all the workshops we've had and the things we've discussed, but I do worry that we do not hear those early thoughts, those early feedback. We see it all the time when officers come to the table in a public forum when they say, sorry, I can't answer that, or we're not quite there yet, if it's public. But in the workshops, often officers are more open to say, here's what we're thinking, here's the direction, we don't have money for this, but what are your thoughts? How can we get over this issue? So I think it's going to sound nice to open things up, but, you know, people aren't here in this room today. They're not going to, you know, opening it up to a couple people who might be interested in our debate on the early parts of an issue. I think it's all about window dressing. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to make my comment as chair of the Finance Committee. All right. So I commend both councillors for putting something up that asks us to be more open and transparent, because I believe that's something that I have just, I think that's good for us all. I've also been thinking about how I could make finance and performance more open and transparent, so that's great. I'm a bit upset that neither of them actually came and spoke to me as one of the chairs about how this might work. But all that aside, I do support the concept. Thinking about it, I want it on record that although it didn't seem that the chair and the deputy could make that, and it's now just the chair only, from my personal perspective, I would expect staff to give me professional advice. And I would expect that my answer to that professional advice, whether that workshop should be open or not open, that I will take that. And I want you all to understand that. So although this says the discretion is mine, I will be asking professionals for their advice. So I don't want you coming to me and saying, you've said this is confidential, why haven't you opened it up? It will be based on professional advice. If any of you have got any issue around any aspect of the finances of the parent, speak to me at any time. So I'm supporting this because in concept, I think it's good. But the practicalities, from a finance perspective, I will take advice on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I remember the conversation, as all of us did, on the 12th of this month. And that there, Your Worship, is when you made the comment around transparency. Councillor Watson actually raised the issue around having some of the workshops open to the public, and your comment was, look, that could be a good idea, depending on obviously the workshop, and the information that will be tabled at the workshop. And you mentioned the word transparency, and Your Worship, look, from my perspective, one, it is not all workshops. If this goes through, it's not all workshops are going to be open. This is not what we're voting on now. Yep. Because at the moment the workshops are still going to be closed. The ones that will end up possibly being open to the public are the ones that the chair of the relevant committees believe that the information that will be shared to the councillors is not confidential. And like Councillor Simpson, and this has happened since the beginning of Auckland Council, where if on the advice, and I'll be doing the same thing and talking to the directors, the staff who report to the PACE committee, I will be asking them that at this workshop, is the information confidential? Yes, it is. Well, guess what? It's not going to be open to the public. Full stop. It's not going to be open to the public, and I am not going to entertain, nor I hope Kathy as well, Councillor Casey, I'm not going to entertain anybody coming to both of us and saying, oh, look, why this, why that? Because my response is because the information we will be sharing is confidential, full stop. Well, but at least I'll be talking to our staff to make that. My point being is not all the workshops are going to be open. None of them. We're not making that decision. The decision here is that we're appropriate, or not appropriate, but at the discretion of the chair, and the information can be shared. Well, then I got no issues with that, none at all. So, Your Worship, I've also got a question, but not on this, so I'll wait for the amendment to be resolved, and then, if that's okay, Your Worship, I've got a question of Marguerite in regards to the agenda and the substantive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Cooper.
Chair, in talking about this, I would hate to think that people's voting patterns in this are then taken as people not supporting transparency, because that's what happens. No doubt this will be a division. No doubt people will be held up as people who don't care about democracy and transparency, but that is not where I'm coming from. I know that with our workshops, these are educative processes for us. They also help develop what's on the agenda, which comes from the democratically elected people. Quite often we'll say, no, it this way, we don't want it that way, we want this information, we want more information, all of those sorts of things. They help us become more educated in the subject matter and help develop agendas. And that's where I agree with one of the previous speakers, that often something's in a workshop and all of a sudden it's in the paper saying, oh, this is going to happen. And that's not what's going to happen at all. It's what was discussed, but it might have been discarded. And so we end up promulgating a whole lot of stuff that was never going to be on an agenda anyway, and that's what concerns me. And then we confuse people even more rather than being transparent. Free and frank discussion, and all of that information, for the most, unless it always comes to us, even if it's in confidential in a meeting. The other issue is you do get that opportunity for the public to have input at the committee meeting. In local boards, people can come, they can say their piece at the time before any decisions are made, and I absolutely want that to continue, but that's the time when the people have got the report, they can actually see what's in it and see what we actually are discussing on the day. Quite often rules are made, and we see it with laws, bylaws, every rule, it's made to stop the ability to abuse something, the lowest common denominator, the whole things that we say. Because for the most part, people are great. But you'll always get certain people that will make things really difficult. And when you've got maybe placards sitting at a workshop, people yelling, people lining up, even when they're asked not to speak and heckling you at the back, it's very hard to absorb complex information, especially when it's not the final decision and you want to be educated and really be able to concentrate. And that's what I worry about. It doesn't happen all the time, but it always has that option to happen. And to finish, I remember I don't like the idea that the chair has that final discretion, not because I don't think they're capable, but it's because what falls on their head if the public or actual fellow councillors don't like their decision. And we saw how Councillor Hulse was absolutely vilified in the public space for deciding her discretion not to take public input because it had already been had. She had death threats. She was called the most vile, putrid names in the public domain because she had that discretion. And I don't want that on any councillor's head. And we know that you can be pressured because it's public. And I don't think that's fair in a workshop setting. So that's why I'd find it difficult to support because I just think it just adds more layers that we don't need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. And just before I begin, just to seek guidance, because I have a comment and a question, should I just bowl it all right in?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, awesome. So the point that I need to make that hasn't been made is we don't actually need to discuss this in the abstract. We actually have examples that we can rely on and refer to, as Councillor Hills has referred to. A couple of local boards actually did this last term. So when I'm finished, can I ask for a comment on the experience of open workshops with those local boards, and are they actually continuing? Because that's the real litmus test. Are they continuing with what they did in the last term? I think this discussion itself is a good example of our need to discuss things in a free and frank way with an appropriate forum to do that. We've talked about our effect on our decision making as councillors, but I also need to point out the effect on staff. I think staff need that ability to come to us and run things up a flagpole and say, look, this isn't actually done yet, but I want your advice on this. Councillors, what are we thinking? And with public behind us, that can be a very difficult conversation for staff. I'll also add that I started this term imploring us to make decisions together, and having a forum with free and frank discussion actually allows us to work together better with more consensus-based decision making, where we can thrash out arguments together. That's what I want to see. So just to finish off, can we comment on the local board experiences of last term and this term?
Phil Wilson to reply.
Clearly a quite vexed issue, and it was in relation to those boards who both decided to have open workshops and those that considered it and didn't choose to have open workshops. I should say that the officer advice has been consistent right through this, which is that workshops are a very useful mechanism, and you should preserve the right to have workshops without public present, because it does constrain in some respects the type of discussion that you can have and the information that it's safe to have staff put forward. So our advice is that the norm should be public excluded. The exception is that in some circumstances it might well be something you choose to do and has merit. As to the experience of the boards, I would not speak for the boards. I think you will find that those boards who have done it, on balance, would say that it has worked well for them. I think the officer view would be that on occasion it has constrained the information that officers are prepared to bring forward and put at risk in terms of disclosure. It is a very careful dance because, as people have observed, we need to be mindful of Lagoima provisions, and this is not in any way intended to be designed to reduce transparency or to do anything that compromises us legally in terms of Lagoima. I'd make the final point, and we give this advice consistently and strongly, that workshops are not a substitute for meetings, and debate and decision making happens at meetings, not at workshops.
Sorry, can I just clarify, because my question wasn't quite answered. So those two local boards that did it last term, I believe that one of them has resolved on this. What did they resolve on? Are they going to continue it or not?
Through the chair, my understanding is the Kaipatiki local board will continue to have open workshop, and the Devonport Takapuna is reverting to the default position of not opening their workshop. Yep. That's my understanding.
So now Hibiscus and Bays local board has decided to have open workshops.
Okay. Thank you. Helpful debate. Look, we need to finish the discussion on the amendment. I'll then ask councillors whether they want to complete the agenda, which I think won't be too long. Every time I say that, the opposite happens, but I'll give councillors a choice of whether they want to break for lunch after we've dealt with this amendment. So, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't support the amendment. I don't support it because of the reasons given by Councillor Coombe. I absolutely agree with everything that you said, and Councillor Cooper. For me personally, as a councillor, I find those workshops as a chance to ask questions, to look dumb, and to use it for information gathering. I would feel uncomfortable if it was open to the public, because everything we do is already public, and this is just a chance to be able to learn more and just be able to do your job as a councillor, to have the opportunity to have those workshops in the way that we've always had them. So I don't support the amendment, but thanks for putting it up.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Look, I'm still not convinced about the discretion of the chair, and I've listened to Councillor Filipaina and the decision making, and I don't expect to be asked or questioned by any councillors if I decide not to put anything out there in the open workshop. I like what Councillor Simpson said about taking advice, but I also think it needs to be balanced with what Councillor Newman said about Lagoima. Somewhere in there is a safety parameter around open or not, but I still remain a little bit uncomfortable around the discretion of the chair of the relevant committee, Councillor Watson, because I don't know that you're going to achieve the outcome that you're asking for in terms of having open workshops. So I don't know, the parameters that Councillor Newman has spoken about in terms of applying the Lagoima principles or legislation, is that a way to give some clarity around what is going to be open or not?
Thank you very much. That was a debate that I hadn't anticipated, but it's been an interesting debate, and I just want to make this point to begin with. For those, I think everybody's spoken sincerely on it. I don't think that there should be any allegation that if you don't support this amendment, you're against transparency. I think the councillors that have supported the status quo have done so for valid reasons. I continue to support the amendment, and it's because the amendment doesn't open everything up, which I think Councillor Hills was a phrase that you used, and that was your concern. I think what Phil Wilson has said to us is that the norm would continue to be public excluded, but the exception is that you could open it to the public where that is, in the opinion of the chair, after advice and maybe after discussion on the committee, appropriate to do so. My main reason for voting for the amendment is I think if you have a blanket rule that you can never open up a workshop, quite often you're discussing things that would be beneficial to be out in the public arena. But in many instances, you know, I've listened carefully to what council have said, and, you know, what the workshop does is that it's we don't make decisions in workshops. It's a pre-decision stage, and it's a chance to put everything on the table, even if it's going to be knocked off. It's a chance to be free and frank. And I think that's the reason why the norm would continue to be that workshops were held in private. But I'd want to have, I know, I can just think back of examples of workshops where they're providing information where you think that'd be great to have that information out in the public arena. So I'm taking, well, no, if I come back to the point that Phil Wilson has made, the norm may well be, and I think it will be, that it will be closed to the public, but it at least allows the discretion to be applied where it's not required for reasons of confidentiality or to have that free and frank advice. At least you provide the opportunity for stuff that could very readily be in the public arena to be put there. Now, ultimately, out of every workshop, you get a paper coming which is then publicly debated and discussed in this body. So that's why I say those that are not in favour of this, they quite appropriately say this is not about not wanting to be transparent and open. This is about wanting us to be able to be free and frank, to float ideas, even if we think they might be silly ideas, but let's put it on the table and see if it works. So I don't have the fear that this suddenly means that everything will be taken offline and that you won't have the free and frank discussion in workshops. I believe that will still be the norm, but I believe that you need to have a discretion where it's appropriate to do so, simply to put the stuff in the public arena. That's my personal view. My view is that also that like the local boards, if we decide to adopt this, it would be pretty much on a trial basis. Let's see how it worked. If it didn't work, then you could revert to the norm. So this does not, passing this motion does not set that in concrete as something that is immutable. As we've seen, Devonport Local Board decided that they would revert to the previous position because of their experience. Other boards have made different decisions. So I'm happy for we can do it by voice or we can do it by recording it. I'm happy for this to be open to a vote on councillors to make their own decision of where the balance of advantage lies on this resolution.
Mayor, just a question.
Sure.
Is this actually what you're putting up here? Can chairs do that anyway? Why do we need a resolution if they can do that? If it's generally closed, that's what I'm trying to...
That's a fair question. Can we, Phil, I've not known a workshop to be open to the public, but I think the norm is that it's been closed. Is it possible in exceptional circumstances to have it open as the...
Well, it hasn't been the practice in the past.
Yeah, I think what this does, Councillor Cooper, is make it explicit that you can have the discretion to open it to the public. That's how I read it, and that's what my vote will be based on. Okay, I think we've debated it, we've thrashed it through pretty thoroughly. Okay, it's been a vote has been called by division, so I'll ask officers to conduct the vote on Amendment E.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yes.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
No.
Councillor Cooper.
No.
Councillor Dalton.
Yes.
Councillor Darby.
Yes.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Henderson.
No.
Councillor Hills.
No.
Councillor Mulholland.
4.
Councillor Newman.
4.
Councillor Sayers.
4.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
4.
Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
4.
Councillor Young.
4.
Carried 15-6.
So I declare that carried by 15 votes to 6. Now, can we come back? I think if we take it item by item on the recommendations, or actually we haven't finished the debate or questions on that. There are other questions I think that people have foreshadowed they wanted.
Chair, just the one question, and Marguerite, can you tell me, I'm assuming that you'll be contacting the members of the working parties that have just been passed to arrange a date for the bi-monthly meetings, because going through the calendar, I haven't seen them in there, and unless, that's all. I just wanted to see whether that in fact will happen, or with the two working parties we've just agreed on. Is it in there?
We will add them
Yeah,
to
thank you.
to the
That's
schedule.
to Te Waitangi and the governance framework. Those two, that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, any other discussion or questions on the other items? I propose to give, with your agreement, to give the choice of option 3 or option 4 under B. But if there's any further questions or discussion, I don't want to omit that. People are probably getting hungry, probably keen to move on. Richard, Councillor Hills, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I just had a quick I do have concerns around what looks like recess when most of us work right through them, and I think the actual debating back and forth of how much we get or don't get looks pretty poor on a public point of view, to be honest. No one, the average person doesn't, you know, if we're looking at it as holidays, I would hope that no one thinks of that as holiday time, because the average person gets 4 weeks and that looks like we're getting 9. Most of us will, you know, work a lot of those time. January makes sense because we shouldn't be having formal decision-making time in January when most people and staff and things are away. But yeah, I guess we just need to think about what that actually means, and I just didn't really like the debate on it, to be fair.
Yeah, I did make the comment, Councillor, right at the beginning, that recess simply means that no meetings are scheduled. I came back, I think, on the 7th of January, and I had a wonderful January going out and doing things in the community that I couldn't do if we had committees scheduled over that period of time, and I'm sure there are others that pretty much did the same thing. Councillor Collins.
Oh, thank you, Sue. I just wanted to say that, firstly, thanks to Marguerite. I think I'm on the right item at the moment. I sent through my feedback, and I was really happy that we reached, I guess, a compromise position. I welcome the 10 o'clock start. There were comments made about me in the Herald about my arrival times. But I think one of the things I wanted to say was that is often one of the things that I try and do is share the drop-off for my daughter. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate councillors. I hope you'll agree to the 10 a.m. start, but it gives us the opportunity as a family to have turns dropping off our daughter and picking her up when we can and that kind of stuff. So, and the pickups we can do on the Mondays or on the Fridays. So I just wanted to say it's important for those of us who've got young children that we have that level of flexibility so that on a couple of days a week. So I dropped her off today. So things like that we can kind of get in because of the timetabling. I note with interest, and because I missed the item before, this is my way of slipping it in, is that the monthly Panuku meetings are on Wednesdays when there are workshops that have been planned. And so I'll note my inability to be there. But I just wanted to state in this forum, Mr. Mayor, my gratitude for the invitation to, for me personally to take on that role as liaison. I'm looking forward to it. I've already had a very lengthy discussion. I drove all the way up to Karaka yesterday. Not that it's far, but it felt really far. And we were able to talk for the whole time I was on the road with the chair, with Adrian Young-Cooper, the chair of Panuku. So it's an opportunity I really look forward to, and I just wanted to offer my thanks for that opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. In 6 months' time, I'll ask you the same question. You might not be so grateful. That's fine. If there's no... sorry, Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to thank you again for the willingness to give consideration to this. I think it's got to move beyond just how things are perceived and to how things can become functional. And all of us are grappling with the council. I mean, the earlier agenda items of we're nearly 10 years old and we are the largest council in New Zealand. We do need to set a standard. And what I think this is recognising is that, yes, the committees that we sit in here and the governing body are really important, but so too are the meetings that we have with our community. I think it's very, very important that we, if we are to get our communities more engaged and understanding of the Auckland Council, that we make our presence felt, that we make ourselves available. And if there are matters in a constituency sense, that we are willing to front up in person or at least on the phone, because issues run and people want to see some measure of accountability in explaining whatever policy decision it might be. So just as I don't think parliamentarians are going to go and apologise anytime soon for the fact that they have recesses for very much the same reasons, in my case, I've been a parliamentarian and I now, along with Councillor Casey, have a constituency that's twice the size of anything that I had as a parliamentarian, and yet somehow miraculously we've got to try and fit in all of those meetings within that constituency within the limitations, and I don't think it worked effectively during the last term. So I, for one, really welcome the changes that we're talking about today. I don't see them as landing permanently at this point. I think they're going to require reviewing over time, but it's a good first step. So thank you for allowing us to have that opportunity.
Thank you, and I feel more than most the difference in size of my constituency than what I had 4 years ago. Councillor Walker, and then I think we'll take the vote.
I just want to speak to one thing briefly. That's the 10 a.m. start. I make the observation that I'd suggest it's easy for us. It's also easy for Aucklanders to get here. It's particularly attractive to people on Gold Card because that kicks in after 9 o'clock. I think it's great. And I'm not on Gold Card, by the way.
You're looking forward to it, though. Thank you very much. I tend to take each of the 4 recommendations still. We've passed the one. Oh, actually, I've got to confirm E, but we'll take each one separately. So the first recommendation, A, which is the meeting and workshops be scheduled between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Secondly, on the schedules, what I propose to do with agreement of the governing body is, since the schedule is based on option 3, I'll put that option first. If that option fails, I'll then put option 4. So we'll again just do it. We don't need to record it. We might need a show of hands if it's close. So your choices here are option 3, which takes a week off the Christmas recess and puts it in October. And if you're in favour of that, then you will vote for the first resolution that I put up. So that's option 3. I'll just ask all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, and that means option B is formally carried. But it's great that we respect minority rights, Councillor Watson. C is authorise the General Manager to amend the schedule if required, in consultation with the Chair. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. D is note that it can be amended if the governing body agrees. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And I'll confirm Resolution E that we passed on the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried.